Well, hello, and a very warm welcome back to the Andrew Eborn Show with me, Andrew Eborn, and my special guest is Edward Oakenfull, who has just resigned sensationally from Advance UK as its leading light treasurer. He was a regular on the show. He's now a big media figure as a result of it, and he's gone over to Restore. And we've been talking about this, Edward, and you're saying that the reason is it's not nearly as democratic as they pretended to be. You weren't really involved as a treasurer should have been. You were basically a bookkeeper. There were key decisions made without your input. And also, it's basically controlled by a few people at the top. Is that a fair summary?
You've got it spot on there, Andrew. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
And we talked about the frustration and a little bit of humiliation because somebody in your position should have been consulted, at least to know where the finances go.
I think so. I think that's a fair assessment.
Before all this chaos, you were a Derbyshire estate agent selling houses, a peaceful existence. Take me back to that exact moment when you looked at modern Britain and said, well, sod this, I have to risk everything and do something about it. What was that moment?
I've always had a keen interest in politics and current affairs, geopolitics. I remember as a child, and this was in the 1970s. Very young child, people coming around to my parents' house and talking and discussing economics and policy and how the country was falling apart in the 1970s recession that we had there. Terrible, the four work, was it the 4 day week and strikes and everything else. So, just from then, really, always had a very keen interest in politics.
And we talk about, and people in politics, they all say it's showbiz for ugly people. That's probably a bit unfair. Roger Stone was on the Andrew Eborn Show saying exactly that. You sacrifice a lot. You have to have a very thick skin, don't you, to be in politics? You talk about the labels which are thrown at you about being a fascist or a Nazi, all those sort of horrible labels. Relationships, there's things that you must have sacrificed, family relationships, friends who've vanished, income gone up in smoke. What are those sort of issues that you've had to sacrifice, if you like, that no interviewer has ever had the guts to ask you about until right now?
Um, I've got a great partner. She's fantastic. She's helped me all along with this, and behind every successful person, there's a very successful woman that's helping you out. I'm sure Mrs. Eborn has, helped you along got you where you are today, Andrew. And a massive shout out to our partners and male, female, whatever, but that have helped us along the way. It's just great to have a partner that's really supportive of this.
Absolutely, and partners are essential, but there will be sacrifices. There'll be some friends, some colleagues who don't like your views. You must have made some sacrifices along the way.
I've just got a really good circle of people, and left and right. I mean, there's some. Unlike you, I just think it's great to just talk with people and listen to different ideas. And I often read The Guardian, for instance, and have a look at different ideas in there. I'm not going to, I'm not just an island that thinks he knows everything. I just like to hear different opinions and different views on things. I think it's how we should be, and really saddens me that we've become so polarized as a society that when I see these people in the Labour Party that won't even date a Tory, I think that what on earth is that all about? Let's have a discussion and talk about these things.
Well, there's a TV show, isn't it? Data Tory. It's
It
got
was
to
a
be.
thing a few years ago, wasn't it? That I just petty, silly stuff, really.
But so there's nobody who's suddenly turned around and say, "I don't like your political views, and therefore I don't want anything to do with you."
No, not really. No, I don't think so.
Okay,
There might be one or two that perhaps walk across the road to not meet me, but I think in
well,
the
how does
main.
that feel? That must be embarrassing.
um, I not really. No, I'm pretty thick-skinned about it, and if they don't want to talk to me, that's up to them, really. I mean, they're entitled to their opinions, and they're entitled to not talk to me if they don't want to me. I'm happy myself and content, really.
Well, it's a shame if people actually cross the road to avoid you. I think, and the
Well,
reality is this: is that
not
people
not
make
literally. I think.
Not literally, okay. So, but it's a shame people make all sorts of assumptions about people's views as opposed to just asking them directly. And I often say, look, perception and reality are rarely aligned.
Yeah, pretty much. It's easy to take words out of context and make assumptions and Chinese whispers and things like this. I try to be really practical and just try to take things on face value, really, rather than listening to all the gossip and be sidelined by tittle tattle and gossip, really.
I know I abhor tittle tattle and gossip, and I abhor the spread of misinformation and disinformation. And so many people will do that. They'll say things behind people's backs. And I always say that what Joe says about Richard says more about Joe than it does about Richard. And if people have got an issue, ask them directly. And that's why I think it's so important, that why I enjoy doing this show so much, is it gives a
Yeah,
platform where we can ask people directly.
and that's why it's great to come on your show and just explain some of the inner workings of Advance UK and just how I've been welcomed with open arms by Restore Britain, which I think is the future of our country.
And as you say, you've been deep in the engine room, even if you're not necessarily controlling everything of what GP Pack you've had Advance UK and now Restore Britain. Give me one
Some
jaw-dropping.
great work on some great work on the GB pack as well. I mean, the Chagos, the awful Chagos deal. There's a lady called Claire Boulevant who's worked her socks off and got loads of people involved in this. We've got Misley Mandarin that I believe was on your
Yes,
particular
he was on the
show.
show. Yeah.
He's camping out now on the Chagos Islands, and I just thought when Iran fired some missiles at Garcia the other day, I hope everything's all right over there.
Well, and this is what happens. We did absolutely have him on the show, and we were talking about the Chagos Islands, and people would talk about the military side there, Diego Garcia, and basically a lot of people hadn't heard of it, but now it's sort of front and center, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
So you've got a
I think
much better
I saw in
understanding.
the Daily Mail it very kindly put a map of Iran and circles where some of their missiles can hit, and London was on the extreme end of these missiles. I mean, talk about trying to sensationalize things, but yeah.
Yeah, there was a terrible joke from a comedian who says the reason Americans start wars is so to help them with geography.
That's a good one. I like it.
Well, we
Um,
haven't heard of a lot of these places. No, we're living in a horrible, horrible time, and the sooner we can get the end of these conflicts, the better. But I want to talk. I mean, the engine room, if you like, are things like the GB Pack, the Advance UK, and Restore Britain. Give me one jaw-dropping, never before told secret from those back rooms.
there's some great people. And this is it's been such a privilege to be part of Advance UK and meet excellent people like yourself, and I've met all sorts of people across the media and through politics. The Great British Pack has been a fantastic opportunity to meet some highly intelligent minds and to be part of some campaigns that have borne fruition, like the Chagos Islands, that hopefully we've just about got stopped now.
Absolutely, and we'll keep looking at that important story. We touched beforehand about the right being fractured, if you like, it's continuing to fracture with all these different parties. You've been front and center, if you like. You know both Ben Habib and Rupert Lowe very well. You've seen the divide up close and personal. What's the one explosive, unfiltered truth about why these two patriotic forces can't seem to stop knifing each other in the back?
You're always looking for an exclusive, aren't you? That's the way it is. And really, I've never met Rupert. I've never spoke to him. Never had it. Never talked. I've talked to senior people within Restore, but never met Rupert himself. I think you'd have to ask Ben and Rupert themselves. Um, I mean, it's Ben's put his heart and soul into Advance from a blank piece of paper, setting it up to a national party. I think did fantastic. But when it's not going right, I think you need to have a cold, hard look at yourself and where things are going. And it's not been going right. Gorton and Denton was a debacle. I think that was a real soul-searching moment, and senior people should have all been asked their opinions on where we go from here. Let's discuss the strategy but people were never asked. There's one or two people at the top that decided everything, and they were just ploughing on with more of the same, which I think is the definition of madness, really.
Well, as you said beforehand. So, what would you have done following that disastrous election?
I got back to basics. I think we need to build up the branches. We need to get the membership increasing. We need to do more marketing, more publicity. For instance, Restore have got a national campaign now on billboards and promoting the party on that. I think we needed to get out there and do a lot more marketing and getting the name across to people and getting more quality people involved and a better senior management team within Advance. I think would have been my thoughts on how we should have gone forward.
Yeah, you said you threw a lot of money at that by-election. And obviously, billboards and other bits and pieces and getting the name out would cost more money. What money was wasted?
A lot of money was spent on that campaign, and we got 154 votes. That's just um, terrible expenditure, really.
But what would you have done differently? Because you say you'd advertise it more, that costs money. What would you have done differently?
The writing was on the wall. I think I was out canvassing in that constituency. I talked to lots of people. I was knocking on doors and talking to people, and lots of people were telling me they really admired Ben Habib. They'd seen him on odd interviews and really thought that Ben was a fantastic orator and great ideas. But they were going to vote. They were still going to vote for reform because they didn't want the Greens or Labour to get elected in that constituency. And the writing was on the wall. We were never going to do much good in that constituency. There's also Advance are standing candidates in the Welsh elections, and they're also standing candidates in the Scottish elections. We're spending a lot of money on those campaigns, and we should have learned from Gorton and Denton. Spending all this money to not really get anywhere is a terrible waste of resources. And for me, in Wales, for instance, it's Plaid Cymru or Labour who are or Reform who are going to win that. Reform for me are the best of a bad bunch. Why try and split the vote and even waste resources on standing Advance UK candidates? I would suggest I was in favour of standing candidates a while ago, but I've revised that now. And I would not be standing candidates in Wales or Scotland. Leave Reform to try and get rid of SNP, and leave Reform to get rid of Plaid and Labour in Wales. And every couple of hundred votes you take off them is potentially one less seat in the Senedd, for instance, in Wales. I would have taken a step back and sat out a year or so's elections and kept building up the brand name of Advance UK. That would have been my strategy.
So you wouldn't have stood in Gorton and Denton.
Not yeah, I would have stood there, and we had a great candidate as well, Nick Buckley, I think the local candidate, but he just got squeezed out by bigger titans than
It wasn't squeezed
little
out. He was
Advance.
forced out by the tiny, not just the Titans, but the monster raving loony party.
Yeah, yeah. Which, in fairness, they got probably very good brand recognition. They've been around for
But
a
no, but
long, long
they only
time.
got they also lost their deposit, £500. You have to get 5% of the vote
Yeah,
in order to not lose your deposit.
yeah.
But you're saying Gorton and Denton. Just to be clear on this, then Edward. What are you saying should have been done differently? Because if you spend more money to raise awareness, that's spending more money, or you turn around and make the decision, don't stand. Which is it?
I think we should have learned a lot of lessons after Gorton and Denton, and we didn't really learn any lessons, and just ploughing on and going into the next cycle of elections in Wales and Scotland for me was not the strategy that should be taken, because it will end in tears and it will end in embarrassment. They'll just
Sure.
get a few hundred votes and
But
further
but
lose
your
credibility.
strategy now, you're saying the lessons to be learned is don't stand until we're ready. So Gorton and Denton doing something differently, are you saying you wouldn't have stood?
No, I think we're definitely right to stand in Gorton and Denton, but we should have. There's a massive lesson there that we should have that Advance should have learned, and they didn't learn it.
But what was that lesson?
That Advance are too small an entity to gain any traction, and they'll just be squeezed out of the vote by reform.
So then why stand? I mean, as I say, it's a circular argument. Why stand if you're going to be squeezed out?
Advance needed to take a massive step back and market themselves better and get more name awareness and build up from the foundations, the branches, and they weren't willing to do that, and to stand in future elections so soon after Gorton and Denton is just was not the right tactic.
So I understand that would be your policy, don't stand in future ones. But Gorton and Denton, you're saying it wasn't a mistake to stand,
It was a
even though
test.
you know that that was going to end up with nothing.
It was a really good test case, but the
Okay.
writing was on the wall weeks before the vote was the final vote.
But just to be clear on what you would have done differently in Gorton and Denton, what would you have done differently?
Nothing. I would have thrown everything at it and given it a good try, and definitely learnt a lot of lessons from it. Not to stand in future until the party was ready.
But you were saying you did throw everything at it, and in fact you were quite upset with how much was thrown at it.
I didn't have any. I wasn't even asked about how much money we were going to spend on it as well, and I would not have spent as much as we did do.
Right. So to be clear on that, you wouldn't have spent as much, but you wanted to raise awareness. So it was a test case,
Yeah,
but maybe not risk as much money because you would have lost anyway. Is that your thought?
I think that's it, Andrew. Yeah.
Okay. Let's have a look at some of these
And
policies.
and and that's why Restore Britain have become this big super tanker. The other day they've announced that they have more members now than the Conservative Party, which has been around for several hundred years. So for me, that's the big juggernaut on the so-called right of politics that everybody should be now getting on board and becoming part of. People joined Advance UK in on the a lot of people joined Advance UK on the understanding that Ben would be merging with Rupert Lowe in the future. I think a lot of people had taken that view, and when it didn't happen, people were very frustrated, and a lot of people cancelled their membership.
And it isn't the word membership because beforehand it wasn't a party. It was like a movement, and Ben always does that sort of gag about movements. And the reality, however, is that the of those tens of thousands, whatever the latest figure are, they were members of the movement. Do they automatically become members of the party?
I don't know. I don't know how that works. I've only yesterday joined Restore Britain, so I'll be looking into things like that in the future.
Okay. And Ben made it very clear that members of Advance UK cannot be a member of another party.
That's right. Yeah, that's why
That,
so many people have been resigning their membership of Advance and joining Restore.
and Ben himself was a member of the movement of Restore Britain. I'll put it to him, but I imagine his answer will be he has to resign his membership of that because he doesn't want to be part of the party.
I would have thought that is the case. And Restore have only the other day have been recognised by the Electoral Commission as a political party. For me, that massive game changer, and it's further led to the decline in Advance.
And from a personal point of view, you say you haven't met Rupert. Who did you have the conversation with about joining Restore, or is it just something you did independently and then announced?
I've talked to a couple of senior people at Restore.
Okay, and so they knew and they would have told Rupert.
I did actually email Rupert as well, and that's when I made contact with some senior people at Restore.
And did Rupert come back to you?
Because I was very frustrated that Advance had not merged with Restore, because for me, that's the only game in town that Advance were too small an entity. Restore had all the momentum. Whether you want to call it a merger or a takeover of Advance UK, it's the only game in town. I believe all of us, UKIP, Heritage Party, we all need to get together under one banner, and that one banner, I think, is for me is Restore Britain.
You say you emailed Rupert. Did he reply?
No, he passed it to another senior person at Restore who I had a conversation with.
Right. Okay. I did see that he did respond when you made the announcement on X that you had resigned. He sort of basically welcomed you on board.
It was very nice of him to acknowledge that, and thank you, Rupert. Rupert never misses an episode of the Andrew Eborn Show, so thank you, Rupert.
So true, so true. Going back to the characters, I mean, you're a very well. Loyal seems a strange word to use when you jump from party to party, but you want to do the right thing. As a man, I've got to know you personally as well as your sort of political side. You were slightly reluctant. I can say this. We talked about this. You were a little bit reluctant to talk publicly because you didn't want to hurt Ben. Elaborate on that.
I've got so much respect for Ben. He's just a really intelligent, articulate. He's got real manners. He please and thank you. Every bit of work that I've done for him, he's thanked me and taken time out to thank me, which I think is really, really important. Every company, people that have worked for me in the past, I've always tried to acknowledge everybody and thank you sometimes is the hardest word to say for a lot of high executives and people that become self-important to you never lose that common touch and common courtesy and please and thank you I think are so important. Manners is a lot for me and Ben he's a class individual. um you know but and he tried everything with Advance, but it's just not happening. The only game in town is to join Restore Britain now in any way, shape, or form, and just make it happen. It needs to happen.
And as you say, you like to treat people with respect. You didn't want to hurt him. How much notice did you give Ben that you were going to leave?
Um, I I think there's no point in giving any notice period. I just resigned there on the spot, really.
Do you think, I mean, would it have been a shock to him?
Um, it shouldn't have been, but he takes advice from just one particular source, and that particular source maybe is not as perceptive as that particular source should be. So maybe it did come as a surprise. You'd have to ask Ben. I'm just speculating.
So has he reached out to you since you made the decision?
Oh yeah, I mean he's thanked me very much for all the work I've done, and we've parted on very good terms.
One day, I mean, your mission is to merge all these parties. One day you'll be working together again.
It is, Andrew. I think we all need to get together for the sake of our country. Otherwise, at the next general election, it's all over. You're going to get the Greens, Labour, Scottish National Party merging into some terrible coalition that you think things bad now that are bad now. You ain't seen nothing yet. If
So,
those not get into government.
so looking at that, I mean, you're saying that all these parties should merge, but with Restore as the lead party. Is that effectively what you're saying?
They've made all the running. It's survival of the fittest. They've got obviously doing some great things. So I've talked to some fantastic people, some really highly intelligent, articulate people within the organization. I've also got some personal friends that have gone across to Restore, set up their own branches that are getting loads of support from their head offices. Survival of the fittest. They're the ones that have taken the lead. They're the big juggernaut that everybody should be getting on board with.
So what should happen to restore, to reform, and well, reform will carry on. You're saying they should join restore as well. Is that effectively
I
what you're
think there are
saying?
elements of reform. Advance were talking to people, county councillors, and people that were looking to defect from reform that, were fed up with how reform were actually going. Reform is a dictatorship run by head office. There's almost no say in the branches, and there's particular things, if you talk about them, you will be thrown out the party. So there are people very, very unhappy in reform that are looking to change allegiances. And I think a lot of those people will come on board with Restore now it's established as a political party.
So what are those particular things that you can't talk about?
Islam is totally off the cards. You cannot talk about Islam in Reform. And if you mention Tommy Robinson in freedom of speech, and you will be thrown out of the party, unceremoniously dumped.
So if you mention freedom of speech, you'll be thrown out of reform.
Yeah, people have made suggestions to Mohammed Zia Yusuf, and the next day they're actually thrown out of the party. I know people that have made suggestions about how the branches should be run better and things like this. So you're better off shutting your mouth and just being just being a yes man or a yes woman and getting on with things.
But you're saying that you leveled the same accusation at Advance. You're saying it's Richard Thompson at the top and maybe a couple of others are basically running the whole ship.
Yeah, pretty much.
So what do you think is the future for Advance?
I wish them well, and there's some really great people out that, I think those really good people will eventually drift over to restore Britain. There are some people, Richard Taylor, that is just sitting it out. He resigned from his position in Wales, and he's taken a year out and just going to think about things. So there'll be maybe some people like that will just leave politics altogether, which will be a shame because there are some really good, capable people in there. But eventually, I think Advance will fizzle out. June, July, August, some big numbers of people joined last year. When those renewals come round, they're facing a bit of a cliff face,
Okay.
and a lot of those people may not renew, and the party will be going backwards. And once you lose momentum in this business, it's all over.
So what's your message to people who are currently Advance members?
There's some real diehards and some people that will never see the light and come over to restore Britain. But I think there's a lot of people just sitting on the fence and waiting, and they've heard things about restore. But from the people that I've talked to at Restore, any of those dark rumours are just not true. I think come on board and go on the Restore Britain website and sign up, become a member, become part of the team.
Okay. I want to look at some of the policies. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to be digging a little bit deeper into those. But for now, Edward, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Edward Oakenfull. I've just joined Restore Britain, and you should too. But also, you should join up and subscribe to the Andrew Eborn Show. Um, Great people on there, some great chats, and look forward to everybody joining up to the Andrew Eborn Show. Thank you.